Authorities discovered her body Monday and now believe the motive in this murder was sexual.
3 men carrying out the body, according to the Polk County Sheriff's Office, of Xavier Antonio Johnson, 29 years old.
I'm talking situations like kidnappings, hostage cases. We're talking murder, we're talking rape, we're talking, the worst violent crimes that occur in our society happen inside Airbnbs.
Founded in 2008, Airbnb has grown from a couch surfing alternative to one of the biggest hospitality companies in the world with 5.6 million listings. That's more than the number of rooms in the top 7 hotel chains combined. Its nearly $76 billion market value shows just how much progress the founders have made in wooing investors since their early days. One of the first Silicon Valley venture capitalists they pitched was Chris Sacca, an early backer of Instagram, Twitter, and Uber. After the presentation, he pulled them aside and said, "Guys, this is super dangerous. Somebody's going to get raped or murdered, and the blood is going to be on your hands." You may think that Airbnb is a safe way to travel, but after you hear the following stories, I wouldn't be so sure. The first floor apartment on West 37th Street, a few blocks south of Times Square, was popular with tourists. So popular that a set of keys was left at the counter of a nearby bodega that Airbnb renters could pick up. That's where a 29-year-old Australian woman and a group of her friends retrieved them. No identification needed, when they arrived in Manhattan to celebrate New Year's Eve in 2015. The apartment had been advertised on Airbnb even though most short-term rentals are illegal in New York. The city, prodded by powerful hotel unions, was at war with the company, which was listing thousands of apartments in the 5 boroughs despite some of the strictest regulations in the country. Soon after ringing in the new year, the woman left her friends at the bar where they'd been celebrating and returned to the apartment on her own. She didn't notice anything amiss or see the man standing in the shadows as she walked into the bathroom. By the time she realized she was not alone, the blade of a kitchen knife was pointing down at her. The stranger grabbed her, threw her down onto the bed, and raped her. Drunken revelers were out wandering the streets, but the woman was too scared to scream. The attacker fled with her phone, but she managed to reach her friends with an iPad, and they ran into the street to find a police officer. The cops were already in the apartment an hour or so later when the man returned and peered into the doorway. They caught him and emptied his backpack, pulling out 3 incriminating items: a knife, one of the woman's earrings, and a set of keys to the apartment. That morning, a call came in from Nick Shapiro, a former deputy chief of staff at the Central Intelligence Agency and National Security Council advisor in the Obama White House. Shapiro was 2 weeks into a new job as a crisis manager at Airbnb Inc. "I remember thinking I was right back in the thick of it," he recalls. "This brought me back to the feelings of confronting truly horrific matters at Langley and in the Situation Room at the White House." Shapiro notified other Airbnb executives, including Chief Executive Officer Brian Chesky. Meanwhile, safety agents from the company's elite trust and safety team sprang into action. They relocated the woman to a hotel, paid for her mother to fly in from Australia, flew them both home, and offered to cover any health or counseling costs. The duplicate keys posed a particular problem for the company and a mystery for investigators. How had the man gotten them? Airbnb doesn't have a policy for how hosts exchange keys with guests, and its reputation for safety, and possibly its legal liability, hinged on the answer. Shapiro, who's left the company, helped coordinate an investigation into the matter. A week later, a staff member was sent to court to see if Airbnb was mentioned during a proceeding. It wasn't. The local media didn't report on the crime either, despite the lurid details, and the company wanted to keep it that way. The story remained unreported until now, in no small part because 2 years after the assault, Airbnb wrote the woman a check for $7 million, one of the biggest payouts the company has ever made. In exchange, she signed an agreement not to talk about the settlement, or imply responsibility or liability on the part of Airbnb or the host. Details of the crime, the company's response, and the settlement were reconstructed from police and court records and confidential documents, as well as from interviews with people familiar with the case. The woman, whose name was redacted in court documents and who asked through her lawyer not to be identified, declined to comment. Ben Briett, an Airbnb spokesman, says the company doesn't have the power to keep stories out of the media, and that despite the wording of the settlement agreement, the woman is able to discuss whether she holds anyone responsible. He adds that Airbnb's goal following the incident was to support the survivor of a, quote, horrific attack, and that the local political issues had nothing to do with its response. The way that Airbnb has handled crimes such as the New York attack, which occurred during a bitter regulatory fight, shows how critical the safety team has been to the company's growth. Airbnb's business model rests on the idea that strangers can trust one another. If that premise is undermined, it can mean fewer users and more lawsuits, not to mention tighter regulation. For all its importance, the safety team remains shrouded in secrecy. Insiders call it the black box, but 8 former members and 45 other current and former Airbnb employees familiar with the team's role, most of whom spoke on condition of anonymity for the fear of breaching confidentiality agreements, provided a rare glimpse into its operations and internal struggles. The job, former team members say, is a nerve-wracking one, balancing the often conflicting interests of guests, hosts, and the company. I had situations where I had to get off the phone and go cry, a former agent recalls. That's all you can do. As you can see just from that first story, Airbnb is able to loophole their way through certain regulations and laws that can sometimes put their guests in extremely dangerous situations. But that wasn't the only instance of something like this happening, as you'll see in these next stories. 2 women, aged 24 and 26, rented a room in Barcelona from Colombian owner Pablo Cesar Cordoba Riascos in October 2011 using Airbnb. According to the court statement announcing the verdict, the accused accompanied the victims around town where they drank very large quantities of alcohol. After showing his tenants back to the apartment, he took advantage of their inebriation and raped them. The 2 victims found themselves unable to physically repel the desires of the accused, who was aware the women were not consenting, as the statement said. It also noted the defendant took both photos and videos of the attack. Upon realizing what had occurred the following morning, the 2 victims filed charges with the police and after returning to the United States reported the aggression to Airbnb, which struck the renter from its service. In response, Cordoba Riascos wrote the woman and threatened to make the photos and videos he had taken of them public if they didn't recant their accusation, but the pair refused to comply. During a search of the accused apartment in March 2012, police discovered hundreds of similar photos and footage taken of other young women. Riascos was sentenced to 11 years, 9 months, and 1 day in prison for double rape, violation of privacy, and proffering threats. A pretty light sentence for such a heinous crime, if you ask me. In October 2017, Ramis Yonuzi rented a room from 3 men, Jason, their landlord Craig, and their roommate Ryan for 3 nights, but ended up extending his stay a week for 210 Australian dollars. When checkout day arrived, he had less than $10 in his account and was therefore unable to pay. On his final day, he packed up his things, tidied his room, and was about to leave when the 3 men confronted him about the money. Jason was the first to attack Ramis. He picked him up and threw him against a wall and started choking him. Craig and Ryan held Ramis' guest down, while Jason beat him until he lost consciousness. The housemates then dragged him out into the garden and continued the attack there, where some sources say Jason also allegedly raped him with a foreign object. Footage of the crime scene was played in court and showed Mr. Yonuzi half naked lying in front of the house with a visibly broken nose and bloodied face. Jason denies knowing that his actions would be enough to kill or cause serious harm to his victim, saying that he only wanted to knock him unconscious. When help finally arrived, Mr. Yonuzi could not be revived by police or paramedics. After finding out that Mr. Yonuzi had died, Jason called his victim a scumbag who deserved everything he got. Jason was sentenced to at least 11 years in prison for manslaughter, while Levy and Smart are serving a maximum 7.5-year and 9-year sentences respectively. Carla Stefaniak was staying in an Airbnb rented room at the Villa Lemos Hotel in Costa Rica when she vanished the day before her November 28, 2018 flight home. She had dropped off a rental car and her sister-in-law, who had an earlier flight, at the San Jose airport on November 27th. When she arrived at the Airbnb where she was staying alone that night, she posted that there were heavy rains and the power went off. Super sketchy, Stefaniak wrote. She later told a friend during a FaceTime call that she might ask a security guard at the Airbnb to buy her a water because of the storm. Stefaniak was on WhatsApp until 8:20 p.m. After her phone died at 9 p.m., she made no further online posts. Her body was discovered by cadaver dogs on December 3rd, 2018, covered in plastic bags and about 200 yards away from the Airbnb where she was staying. The security guard named Martinez was arrested later that day. Investigators said his story demonstrated a lot of inconsistency and did not match up with the security video. Martinez, a Nicaraguan immigrant who arrived in Costa Rica in June of that year, had been staying in apartment 7 at the resort where he was working as a security guard, investigators said. Stefaniak had been staying in apartment A right next door, and when investigators searched her room, they found blood. An autopsy found that Stefaniak's body had stab wounds to the neck and other areas, as well as injuries consistent with having been hit in the head. Prosecutors said during the trial that Martinez had attempted to rape Stefaniak and harmed her when she tried to fight him off. A witness testified that Martinez had confessed to the murder, and police said he lied, saying Stefaniak had left the resort on November 28th. Stefaniak's family sued Airbnb, claiming it did not conduct a background check on Martinez, who they say immigrated to Costa Rica illegally. The case is currently in operation as of this year. Martinez was sentenced to only 16 years in prison for the murder of Carla 3 years later in February 2020, a small victory for the family of the victim. Xavier Antonio Johnson rented an Airbnb in Florida earlier this year to use it as a place to sell various drugs. At some point during his stay, one of 3 men shown in the following video shot and killed Xavier before carrying his body outside. After shooting Xavier, those 3 men dropped Johnson off at the Heart of Florida Hospital in Haines City, where he was later pronounced dead. So far, only 1 man has been arrested that was involved in this case. Justin Jenkins. Jenkins already has at least 55 criminal charges, with 35 of those being felonies. Now Jenkins faces a first-degree murder charge. The other 2 men involved in this murder have unfortunately not been found yet. The fact that the men in this video decided to take Xavier to the hospital after shooting him leads me to believe that they were friends of the victim and possibly did not mean to actually kill him, because why else would they have taken him to the hospital? But that could just be me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I put a lot of work into this video. I thought it would be a fun idea, and I hope you guys enjoyed it just as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did enjoy this video, please drop a like on it, as it really does support me, and it really helps me know that I did a good job and lets me know you guys want me to make more of these videos. And obviously, if you did like it and you want to see more like this, subscribe. Other than that, thank you guys once again so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.